What if the real reason someone with avoidant tendencies pulls away has almost nothing to do with you and everything to do with what feels safe inside their own nervous system? Let me share something most people don't grasp until the relationship has already crumbled around them. You probably think you already understand avoidant people. You probably believe you know exactly why they retreat, why they go quiet, why they turn cold the second things start feeling too real or too deep. But honestly, you don't. Not completely. Not in the way that actually changes outcomes. Almost everything you've picked up about avoidant behavior only covers half the story. And most of what you assume they want from love is probably backwards. If you don't fully understand what I'm about to walk you through, you'll keep repeating the exact same painful cycle. You get close, they pull back, you panic, the whole thing falls apart, and you're left wondering what on earth happened. Here's the piece almost nobody tells you. People who avoid closeness aren't running from love itself. They're running from whatever doesn't feel safe to them. That's a completely different thing. And the reason so many people end up losing an avoidant partner is actually simple. They don't know which rare qualities avoidant people are genuinely drawn to. Not the qualities you assume matter, not the things you've been trying so hard to offer them. I'm talking about traits almost nobody practices anymore. Traits that make an avoidant person stop, take a breath, and think, wait, this feels different. If you've ever watched someone slowly drift away from you, if you've ever been told you're too much, too emotional, too intense, if you've ever felt like no matter how hard you try, it's never quite enough. If you've ever questioned your entire sense of worth because someone kept staying just out of reach, then you need to hear this. Because once you understand what avoidant people actually value, everything shifts. Your confidence shifts. Your relationships shift. The way you carry yourself in the world shifts. So pay attention, because once you hear this, you'll never look at avoidant behavior the same way again. You're about to learn something most people go their whole lives without understanding. When I talk about staying emotionally grounded, even when things get messy, I don't mean pretending you don't care. I don't mean burying your needs, or walking on eggshells, or shoving your feelings down just to appear unbothered. What I mean is something far more powerful and honestly quite rare. The ability to stay connected to yourself even when someone else disconnects from you. Avoidant people notice this trait almost instantly because most people completely fall apart the moment an avoidant partner pulls back. Let's be honest about human nature here. When someone you care about steps away, your brain sets off every alarm it has. Suddenly you're replaying old conversations, dissecting their tone, overanalyzing every text, questioning every single thing you said or did. You start turning their distance into a verdict on your worth. You assume you must have messed up somehow. You assume maybe you're just too much. That's exactly what old emotional wounds do. They whisper lies about who you actually are. Staying grounded means you don't let that panic take the wheel. It means pausing before reacting. It means understanding the difference between someone pulling back because of their own attachment history versus someone pulling back because you're somehow not enough. Avoidant people are wired to brace for emotional chaos. Early in life, they learned that closeness often comes bundled with pressure, demands, intensity, and overwhelm. So the moment they feel the need for space, they brace themselves for your reaction. They expect panic. They expect a barrage of questions. They expect a flood of emotion. They expect to feel cornered. They expect you to grip tighter the further they drift. But when none of that happens, when instead you stay calm, steady, rooted in yourself, it throws them completely off balance. Your steadiness becomes the first time in their life that someone hasn't treated their need for space as a threat or a burden. They pull away, bracing for you to cling harder, and instead you stay centered. Not cold, not distant, not punishing them with silence, just solid, just steady, just quietly present in a way that communicates, I'm okay, I'm still here. Your need for space isn't going to break me. They rarely, if ever, experience this. Do you understand how uncommon that actually is? Most people meet distance with anxiety. They chase, they over-explain. They stretch themselves thin, trying to fix something they've imagined is broken. They try to force closeness back into existence. But a grounded person creates a completely different atmosphere, one that feels like safety instead of suffocation. This kind of steadiness isn't passive. It's not letting someone walk all over you. It's not silencing your own needs just to keep them comfortable. It's the courage to actually feel your fear, your confusion, your frustration without letting those emotions dictate your behavior. It's emotional regulation. It's maturity. It's understanding that your reactions belong to you, not to them. And that emotional stability sends a clear, unmistakable message to an avoidant person. You are not dangerous, because in their mind, emotional intensity equals threat. Spiraling equals pressure. Overreacting equals danger. A grounded person doesn't demand instant reassurance from them. They don't panic when the avoidant person needs breathing room. They don't turn every small moment into a crisis. They hold themselves with enough steadiness that the avoidant person actually feels like they can exhale around them. This is exactly what avoidant people crave, even if they'd never say it out loud. Someone who doesn't fall apart when they create distance. Someone who doesn't chase them out of fear. Someone who can stay present without smothering. Someone who can hold emotional space without piling on more weight. Think back to a time someone you cared about pulled away, and instead of grounding yourself, you reacted purely out of fear. You sent one more message. You over-explained yourself. You apologized for things that weren't even your fault. You tried to reopen the conversation. You chased after a closeness that felt like it was slipping through your fingers. And the harder you chased, the further they retreated. Not because you weren't good enough, not because you did something wrong, but because your reaction confirmed the oldest belief the avoidant person carries. That intimacy equals pressure, and pressure equals danger. Now picture that exact same moment, but this time you respond from a place of groundedness. You feel the fear, but you don't act on it. You give them room without abandoning your own sense of worth. You don't punish them. You don't panic. You don't try to force closeness back into being. You just stay steady. You stay open. You stay warm. That kind of emotional consistency hits an avoidant person like a shockwave because it completely dismantles the story they've told themselves their entire life, that closeness always leads to chaos. When they pull back and nothing blows up, when you remain balanced and composed, it puts the tiniest crack in their emotional armor. That's what groundedness does. It signals emotional safety. And emotional safety is something avoidant people never learned how to ask for, even though they desperately need it. When you stay centered, they slowly start to trust that being close to you won't drown them. They begin to believe that connection doesn't have to mean chaos. They start to feel like intimacy is something they can actually survive instead of something they have to flee from. This doesn't mean ignoring your own needs. It means expressing them from a place of groundedness. Instead of reacting, you respond. Instead of collapsing into fear, you stand in your truth. Instead of demanding constant reassurance, you offer clarity. Something as simple as, I care about this connection. I'm here. I'll be ready to talk whenever you are, and I won't lose myself just because things feel uncomfortable right now. That kind of energy is magnetic, not just for avoidant people, but for anyone, because it radiates deep self-respect. It shows maturity, it shows emotional intelligence, and people can feel emotional intelligence even without ever naming it out loud. It shows quiet strength and resilience, especially when someone who's learned to survive by keeping people at arm's length notices that you're steady. People with avoidant tendencies, who navigate relationships by maintaining distance, can't help but notice the difference when you stay calm and centered. You show them that their distance doesn't destroy you. You show them that emotions don't have to explode into chaos. You show them that closeness doesn't automatically trigger panic or survival mode. And in that moment, you become someone they can genuinely trust, possibly in a way they've never trusted anyone before. That trust becomes the soil everything else can grow from. There is something remarkably powerful about a person who can hold their own emotional space without punishing anyone, without demanding closeness, and without trying to yank someone out of their need for breathing room. It's rare these days. Most people default to just two reactions: cling tightly or shut down entirely. They either flood the relationship with fear and worry, or they vanish into themselves to dodge feeling vulnerable. But the rare individual who stands steady in the middle, staying connected without chasing and grounded without turning cold, becomes unforgettable to an avoidant person. Avoidant people expect extremes. They're used to reactions that scare them off. When they pull back, they anticipate anger, guilt trips, emotional storms, or silent punishment for not showing up the way someone wanted. Their entire life has trained them to brace for consequences. Every time they move closer or step further away, they prepare for someone else's emotional explosion. Closeness has always arrived bundled with demands, pressure, and emotional weight they don't feel equipped to carry, so they retreat to avoid disappointing someone or to avoid getting hurt themselves. But everything shifts when they encounter someone who can maintain their own balance, someone who doesn't crumble, doesn't chase, doesn't wield silence as a weapon or guilt trip them for needing space. That kind of steadiness is a brand new experience for them. Picture this. They take a small step back, and instead of pressure, what they feel from you is calm presence. You don't crowd them. You don't flee. You don't punish them by shutting down. You don't make them feel like a failure for needing space. You stay centered. You stay warm. You stay open. That calm balance creates a feeling inside them they almost never get to experience: relief. Because for once, they're not responsible for managing someone else's emotions on top of their own. They don't feel like they're disappointing you. They don't feel trapped. They don't feel like the entire relationship hinges on their next move. What they feel instead is respect, and that respect is essentially pure oxygen to them. When you give them room without withdrawing your energy from the connection entirely, what you're really communicating is, "I'm here and I'm okay." That message sinks into the parts of them that fear being swallowed whole or controlled. It replaces the fear of being consumed with the feeling of actually having a choice. Avoidant people need choice the way the rest of us need air. They need closeness to feel like something they can move toward, not something being forced onto them. When you hold your own space with confidence, you make room for them to approach on their own terms. This is where a lot of people get it wrong, though. They assume giving an avoidant person space means vanishing entirely, going cold, acting distant, or pretending not to care. That isn't holding space. That's emotional abandonment. It's a reaction, not a conscious choice. And avoidant people feel the difference sharply. When you go cold, they feel judged. When you go silent, they feel punished. When you pull your warmth away, they feel rejected. And all of that awakens their deepest belief: I'm safer alone. Holding your own space means something entirely different. It means staying emotionally available without demanding anything in return. It means keeping your warmth intact. It means not shrinking, not over-explaining, not scrambling to fix the discomfort. It means continuing to be yourself without pushing for closeness. You keep living your life, staying grounded, understanding that your worth isn't determined by how close or how far someone else chooses to be. Your steadiness becomes something like a lighthouse they can return to once their internal storm settles. Never underestimate how powerful that is. Avoidant people almost never have a safe place to land. They're used to dealing with two kinds of people: those who take their need for space personally, and those who try to flood that space with pressure, questions, and emotional weight. A person who stands firmly in their own center is rare. Someone who respects an avoidant person's rhythm while still maintaining their own emotional balance is nearly impossible to find. And because it's so uncommon, avoidant people notice it instantly. Here's something important to understand. People who can hold their own space are emotionally secure. They aren't operating from fear. They aren't trying to control the relationship. They aren't clinging to it out of a need for reassurance. They know exactly who they are. They understand that a pause doesn't equal rejection. They understand that someone needing room doesn't mean the relationship is collapsing. Avoidant people find this kind of confidence deeply calming because it means they don't have to protect you from their own emotional rhythm. Holding your own space teaches them something they've never truly learned. Connection doesn't have to be a tug of war. It doesn't have to be a chase. It doesn't have to be a battle for control. It can simply be two people standing in their truth, communicating honestly, showing up authentically, and giving each other enough room to breathe. That kind of dynamic actually heals avoidant people. It changes how they understand intimacy altogether. It transforms closeness from something threatening into something manageable, something safe. Something important happens within you too when you learn how to do this. You stop living in constant reaction mode. You stop trying to fix every uncomfortable feeling that arises. You stop abandoning yourself just to keep the connection alive. You start trusting that you can handle uncertainty. You start valuing your own emotional calm. That creates a quiet strength the avoidant person feels, even in your silence. They notice your steadiness. They notice you're not forcing anything. They notice you're not filling the quiet with fear or lengthy explanations. They notice you're not treating their need for space like an emergency. That steadiness becomes a kind of soft magnet, drawing them closer in a way that feels natural and safe because you no longer register as another emotional burden they have to manage. You become someone they can breathe around, someone they can return to without fear, someone whose presence feels like freedom rather than obligation. The truth is, the ability to hold your own space without punishing or pressuring someone is one of the highest forms of emotional maturity there is. It means you've learned to regulate yourself. It means you see the other person as separate from your own emotional triggers. It means you can love without controlling, connect without spiraling, and stay steady even when uncertainty shows up uninvited. Avoidant people value this more than they could ever fully articulate because it offers them something rare, safety with another human being, and safety is always the first doorway into real closeness. When I say avoidant people are drawn to those whose self-worth doesn't hinge on how the avoidant person behaves, I mean something much deeper than surface-level confidence. Imagine how soothing that is for someone who's lived in fear that closeness will pull them under. When they step back and you don't panic, when you don't turn it into a referendum on your worth, you show them something powerful. You show them you're not relying on their approval to stay steady. You show them you're not asking them to shoulder your emotional weight. You show them you're not expecting them to regulate your feelings for you. That's deeply relieving for an avoidant person because their biggest fear is disappointing someone who leans too heavily on them emotionally. They don't want to hurt you. They don't want to let you down. They don't want to feel like your entire emotional world collapses the second they need a moment to themselves. That kind of pressure is too much to carry, and the instant they feel it, they retreat. But a self-assured person changes the entire equation. You become someone they can respect because you respect yourself. You become someone they can trust because you're not using the relationship to fill some internal void. You become someone they can approach without fear because you're not holding them responsible for your happiness. That kind of emotional energy is rare. It comes from genuine inner stability, not coldness, not ego, but real strength. It's the kind of strength that says, I know who I am, I know what I deserve, I want connection, but I don't need you to be flawless for me to feel okay. That energy carries weight because avoidant people aren't chasing perfection, they're searching for safety. They want someone who can stay rooted even when intimacy starts to feel uncomfortable. When your sense of self-worth doesn't rise and fall with their movements, you're sending a message without saying a single word. I choose you, but I don't fall apart for you. That message changes everything. It helps an avoidant person stay close instead of running, because now closeness isn't a demand. Your presence no longer requires them to sacrifice their autonomy. You're not asking them to hold your entire emotional world together. You're giving them the freedom to simply be themselves without expecting them to carry your emotional weight on top of their own. And for someone who has spent their whole life dreading emotional responsibility, that freedom is often the first time intimacy has ever felt safe to them. Usually, the moment an avoidant person pulls away, the other person grows tense or uneasy. And the more unease the other person radiates, the more overwhelmed and flooded the avoidant partner begins to feel. That reaction quietly reinforces their long-standing belief that closeness always leads to pressure. But when they encounter that rare kind of person who doesn't respond with fear, panic, or neediness, something inside them shifts. It disrupts the pattern they've repeated for years. It makes them pause. It makes them question their automatic reactions. They start to notice that something about this particular connection feels different. Slowly, they begin to understand that maybe closeness doesn't have to feel tight or suffocating after all. Maybe it can feel steady. Maybe it can even feel calm. Your consistent sense of self-worth becomes a grounding force for them, even when things feel uncertain, even when communication slows down, even when the emotional landscape turns shaky or confusing. You don't collapse into fear. You don't shrink into insecurity. You don't explode into panic. You stay connected to yourself. You stay steady. You stay clear. You remain rooted in who you are. And that consistency creates room for the avoidant person to eventually come back, not because they feel pushed or pressured, but because they genuinely feel safe in your presence. This is where the real transformation begins. When your worth isn't shaken by their distance or their silence, when you refuse to let their rhythm dictate your value, the avoidant person starts to feel like they can finally show who they truly are. They feel like they're allowed to be imperfect, uncertain, human. They feel like they can breathe without you interpreting every pause as abandonment. For maybe the first time, they experience freedom instead of pressure, and that freedom is exactly what allows them to slowly move toward you instead of instinctively pulling away. When you stop negotiating your worth based on how much closeness they can offer in any given moment, you become a stable point in their otherwise chaotic inner world. You become someone who doesn't get pulled apart by their distance, someone who doesn't crumble when communication slows down, someone who doesn't beg, chase, or plead for reassurance, someone who doesn't let fear run the entire relationship. And a person like that becomes unforgettable to an avoidant because you're offering them something they didn't even realize they needed, a connection that doesn't swallow them whole. Someone who stands firmly in themselves gives the avoidant person room to exist without feeling like the whole relationship rests on their shoulders alone. That's what makes them feel safe enough to stay instead of run. That's what gives them the time they need to grow. That's what builds real trust. Something almost life-changing happens when an avoidant person meets someone who isn't trying to cure them, repair them, or decode their every reaction like a puzzle to be solved. Someone who doesn't quietly operate from the belief of, if I can just get them to open up more, if I can just pull them a little closer, if I can just get them to share their past, then finally they'll become the partner I want. Avoidant people sense that hidden agenda almost instantly because they've spent much of their lives feeling misunderstood. The moment they sense someone trying to reshape them into whatever makes that other person feel secure, they retreat, not because they don't care, but because pressure disguised as help feels like emotional suffocation to them. An internal alarm goes off, telling them they're not safe. But when they meet the rare person who simply lets them be themselves, someone who doesn't poke or prod, someone who doesn't dig through their inner world like an interrogation, someone who doesn't demand honesty on a strict timeline, something almost unbelievable happens for them. They feel accepted, plainly and genuinely. Real acceptance, not the kind where someone tolerates them on the surface while quietly trying to fix them behind the scenes. Not the kind where someone pretends to accept them while secretly cataloguing every emotional slip. This is the kind of acceptance stance that says, you get to be exactly who you are. I'm not here to rush you along. I'm not your repair technician. I don't see you as some broken project to complete. That kind of acceptance is incredibly rare, and avoidant people feel it in their bodies. Their entire nervous system relaxes in a way they didn't even know was possible. They stop bracing for the moment you'll try to push past their boundaries. They stop preparing their mental exit route. They stop gearing up for emotional ambushes disguised as ordinary conversations. For maybe the first time, they get to simply exist without being dragged into emotional depths they aren't ready for. They can finally breathe without fear. It's not that avoidant people don't want intimacy or connection. It's not that they're incapable of depth or closeness. They genuinely want those things. They just want them delivered at a pace their nervous system can actually handle. They want time to warm up. They want to feel safe enough before they open up. They want emotional closeness to be something they actively choose, not something forced on them by someone else's fear. Most people mistake this pacing for emotional unavailability, but it isn't a lack of feeling, it's emotional timing. When you allow an avoidant person to move at their natural rhythm, something remarkable happens. They open up more freely. They share more willingly. They express emotions they'd never reveal if they felt rushed or cornered. The difference is that this openness comes from them, not from pressure applied by you. Choice is the foundation of intimacy for someone with avoidant tendencies. When closeness becomes something they choose rather than something demanded of them, everything shifts. They become more engaged. They become more honest. They become more genuinely connected. Think about how often avoidant people have been criticized throughout their lives, called too cold, too distant, too slow to open up, too private, too confusing, too independent, too hard to read. They've heard these judgments from partners, friends, even family. So when someone finally shows up who isn't trying to reshape them or fix their personality, they feel a kind of safety they rarely experience. You stop being a threat to their independence. You stop being someone they feel the need to guard themselves against. You become someone who sees them as a person with a different rhythm, not as someone broken. Here's something most people overlook entirely. Avoidant people crave emotional safety even more than they crave closeness itself. And acceptance is safety. Acceptance doesn't demand. Acceptance doesn't force. Acceptance doesn't drag someone into emotional waters they aren't ready to enter. Acceptance simply says, I see you exactly as you are. I hear you. I understand your pace. I'm here for connection, not for control. Once an avoidant person senses this from you, they stop hiding. They stop holding back. They stop bracing for the inevitable moment they'll disappoint you emotionally. Instead, they begin revealing sides of themselves that almost nobody else has ever seen. Not because you forced it out of them, but because they finally feel free. And here's the strange, almost counterintuitive truth. When you stop trying to fix them, they actually grow faster. Not because you demanded change, but because you created an emotional environment where growth can unfold naturally on its own. Your acceptance becomes the spacious room they can finally expand into. Your patience becomes the quiet signal telling them it's safe to step forward. Your calmness becomes the space where their vulnerability finally wakes up. Most people believe that pushing creates closeness, but with avoidant people, pressure creates distance and acceptance creates real connection. The more you try to decode them, the more they close off. The more you let them simply be, the more they show you. The more you try to shape their emotions, the more they shut down. The more you respect their pace, the more trust they build with you. Avoidant people know instantly when someone sees them as a project to fix. They feel it deep in their bones, but they also recognize when someone sees them as a whole human being, complexities, fears, slow steps, and all. And that's the person they eventually feel safe enough to love with everything they have. Because acceptance, not pressure, is what actually reaches their heart. It's the thing that lets them stay. It's the thing that makes them choose closeness instead of running from it.